Starting to see people coming in. Good afternoon, everyone. Feel free to send a chat to everyone saying hi, telling us where you're from. Meanwhile, let's wait until everyone comes in. We have 24 and counting on the webinar. Meanwhile, while waiting for everyone to come in, just a couple of reminders from us. First, hello, I'm Rob Carollo from Trust ID Services and the EOSC Hub Communications team. So a couple of things, just a reminder that this webinar will be recorded and that this will be published in the EOSC Hub webinars page. Also the slides. I would suggest that you please keep your questions up to the end of the webinar, just in case some of the questions you may have are actually tackled in the slides of our speakers later on. Also, for the question and answer portion at the end of this webinar, please raise your hand virtually. There's a function here in Zoom that allows you to raise your hand, and that will basically catch your attention. We will give you the floor and unmute you, allowing you to introduce yourself and state your question. Okay, we have about 30 now, so I suppose, shall we begin?
Yeah.
Okay, so over to you, Gergely.
Welcome everyone to the first webinar from the EOSC Hub project. I'm glad to have Rob, Dale, and Sergio with me today. I will give a very brief introduction to the project, to EOSC Hub, before passing the mic to Sergio and Dale. My name is Gergely Sipos. I'm involved in the project since the beginning, and my contribution spans across many of the work packages. I work at the EGI Foundation, which is the coordinating institute of the EOSC Hub project. EOSC Hub is a 3-year project that lays down the integration and management system of the European Open Science Cloud, acting as an entry point for different kind of stakeholders who want to contribute to EOSC or want to benefit from EOSC in different ways. The project is 33 million euros in terms of budget, with more than 100 institutes involved, bringing more than 150 persons onto the contributors. The project is coordinated by the EGI Foundation and have the infrastructures of EGI, EUDAT, and Indigo Data Cloud in the driver's seat, together with over 20 digital research infrastructures spanning across the whole range of scientific disciplines. These stakeholders together bring services, software, and data for advanced digital data-driven research and innovation. The project started more than 2.5 years ago, and we have another 6 months to go with an extension that will lead us until the end of March next year. The project spans across 4 activity areas. The most important item is the services that the project partners make available for EOSC users. These services, on one hand, provide baseline generic services for open science, spanning across compute, storage, and other digital fundamental IT services. Science discipline-specific services, applications, tools, frameworks, as well as data, and human services in different topics on training, different topics on consultancy, mostly focusing on integrating services with the baseline services. The second area of work is what's called federation services, and this is often referred to as a glue or the hub in the EOSC ecosystem. The most important element here is the EOSC portal and the EOSC marketplace, but there are other enabler services such as an authentication and authorization infrastructure to enable single sign-on across different providers, usage accounting, service monitoring, as well as user help desk system that facilitates the integration of the science discipline specific and the generic services. The third area of work is the Federated Operations, which is based on a lightweight certification scheme that are used by the providers to ensure user-driven and customer-driven delivery of services, which covers topics like providing service level agreements, offering customer relationship management processes. And the fourth area of work is harmonizing policies, rules, compliance across the whole ecosystem in order to simplify the landscape for EOSC users who wants to access services for open science from different communities or different providers. These processes and policies are harmonized and made available as recommendations or as rules to implement for the providers who join the ecosystem. The project delivered 9 so-called key exploitable results, which are shown in the outer circle on this slide. This webinar program, which is started recently by the project, will go through roughly these topics, with the first webinar today focusing on business and sustainability models. Other webinars in the future will talk about specifically the EOSC portal, marketplace, how to join services through that, about different integration guidelines, about engagement with industry through the Digital Innovation Hub, rules of participation as service provider, or the service management system, which is used for the certification of providers. And with this short introduction, I would like to finish the overview of EOSC-hub and would like to invite Dale and Sergio to give the main part of the webinar focusing on business model recommendations.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So, thank you for joining this webinar, which supports the public consultation on the recently released EOSC-hub briefing paper on provision of cross-border services. Together with Sergio Andriozzi, for the next 30 to 35 minutes or so, we're going to take you through the contents of the paper, summarising it for you, and then there will be time at the end for questions and answers. So we wanted to begin by explaining to you what our approach was in setting out on this work on cross-border services, the why, the how, and the what. So in terms of the why, we based our work on the premise that research without easy access to high quality data and world-class infrastructures cannot be competitive in the modern age. How should cross-border services play their part in this? Well, the EOSC needs to provide research communities with frictionless access to data and related services, and to better connect suppliers, users, and funders. So what needs to be done? Well, we need to gain insights into the value chain enabling research, so funding, producing data, and using services, to rationalise that, and then on the basis of that, to try to design the necessary interventions to bridge gaps in the existing ecosystem. So that was our point of departure, if you like, where we started out from. In terms of this, the work that we've done, which led to the production of this briefing paper, we've had a core team consisting of representatives of SURF, JISC, INFN, EGI, and CSC working together. And together we've examined part of the research value chain that I've just mentioned. So we have focused down on specific things. We have not, of course, had the resource to be able to look at the entire value chain. So we've focused on provision of publicly funded rivalrous resources in a cross-border scenario. We've also focused on demanding use cases. And because of the fact that we've had a focus on publicly funded service providers, that has brought procurement considerations into play as well. As a result of the work that we've done, which we'll explain over the next few minutes, we gained quite a number of different insights which could be regarded as opportunities for the EOSC, and we've also proposed some recommendations about what we feel should be done, and those are the points really that we're trying to gather feedback on in the form of the consultation. So the feedback is currently open. It's open until the 9th of October, and you should be easily able to find links to it if you haven't already linked to from the information about this webinar. So this is the agenda for the rest of the slide set, starting with the context and background, and then we'll outline the use cases to you and the platform design work that we conducted. And after that, we'll summarise the findings that we drew from those two pieces of work, followed by outlining the insights and recommendations that we've formulated, and then a few brief concluding remarks. So beginning with context and background. Just a quick look at the timeline. So going back to last summer, EOSC-hub produced the first of its 3 procurement deliverables, which looked at a demand assessment in particular, trying to assess what the demand was for procurement in the environment of the EOSC. That was shortly followed by the first EOSC-hub briefing paper on the Federating Core, which put forward proposals for the organisation and composition of the EOSC Federating Core. And that was subject to a public consultation, and then an amended, updated briefing paper was published a few months later. Meanwhile, late last year, the EOSC Sustainability Working Group published its Tin Man document, and a few months later they published an analysis, a summary of the feedback that they had received through their public consultation. In February, we posted a working draft, it's still a working draft, of a community position paper on the Federating Core, which largely is based on the EOSC-hub Federating Core proposals. And then rolling forward to this summer, there was the second procurement report, which looked at 4 different procurement models, in particular looking at public-to-public procurement, which is the most relevant scenario for the cross-border services work. And then very recently we published this briefing paper that is the subject of this webinar just now. And then of course, as you probably know, the Iron Lady report is due to be published shortly as well. So I wanted briefly to spend a few moments just looking back at the most relevant part of the EOSC-hub Federating Core proposals. So not intending to try to summarise all of those proposals, but in the kind of brown and orange boxes that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, those 3 boxes are what we proposed as the Federating Core. So these are the EOSC-hub proposals. The Federating Core consisting of 3 elements: the compliance framework, the hub portfolio, and the shared resources. And I wanted in particular to focus on the shared resources here. So we defined those as resources, including scientific outputs, and the storage and compute hosting platforms needed to deposit, share, and process them. And that definition includes rival resources, which are often provided in the research environment by national publicly funded e-infrastructures. So that's very much the focus of the further work that we then conducted in the form of the cross-border services work. Also relating to these proposals, there was a statement in the Federating Core proposals about the value add of the EOSC, which is that it's about its ability for researchers to access and reuse data alongside the shared resources through the same portal. And in the draft community position paper, there is a statement that the EOSC needs to create the financial vehicle to cover the costs of provision and consumption of the shared resources beyond their originating communities. So coordinated provisioning and funding of the Federating Core is expected to bring economies of scale by aligning investments from member states with the compensation of the marginal costs that would be associated with using depletable resources across borders. Okay, so it's these statements that to a certain extent motivated the desire to drill in more detail into the shared resources, to be able to investigate them more, to try to actually get a slightly clearer idea of exactly what should constitute the shared resources, and really to go in more detail into what are the issues in providing these types of resources in a cross-border scenario. So briefly, just to also give a comparison, partly by way of hopefully reducing confusion, because I know that with the EOSC-hub project having proposed federating core proposals using a set of vocabulary, and then the Tin Man being published, which also introduced its own vocabulary, I think there was room for confusion. So this mapping diagram is quite useful, I think, and it is just an attempt to sort of map the different components to one another. So as we understand the definitions that were described in the Tin Man document, what it would mean is that what in EOSC-hub we've described as the hub portfolio and the compliance framework, those two elements would belong in what the Tin Man calls the EOSC core. Whereas what we've called the shared resources and the service portfolio, we understand would live in the EOSC exchange based on the definitions in the Tin Man. And hopefully that helps to make things a little clearer for you, because I know that that can be quite confusing actually. So moving on, I'll outline what the use cases were that we conducted. There were two use cases involving the Elixir community and the LOFAR community, actually represented by Astron. They both concerned provision and consumption of shared resources beyond their normal constituencies. They involved simulating negotiations for cross-border storage and compute resources. So these were not actually real-life negotiations, although the use cases were real enough in the sense that they were actually a reflection of genuine desires within the two user communities for things that they wanted to do. And the aim of the use cases was to explore the opportunities to reach an agreement on the cross-border provision of resources provided by publicly funded actors. So the Elixir use case involved, so in the Elixir community, there's a large number of small research groups which wish to analyze existing public Elixir data sets, which are generally of the order of several petabytes large, and to combine those with usually smaller but private data sets that have often been produced already by these individual research groups. The aim of the use case was to explore the possibility for outsourcing the computing platform that would be needed to actually perform this analysis that these research groups would wish to do, and to investigate what would be involved in doing so. So we had the user on the one hand in the form of the Elixir community represented by EBI, EMBL. And on the supplier side, we had 4 publicly funded suppliers in the form of Chestnut, CSC, INFN, and SURF, sorry. Then for the LOFAR use case, represented in these use cases by Astron. So the idea here is that LOFAR have got already a distributed instrument data archive, which is a federated archive with 3 sites in 3 different countries currently. And the interest here was in trying to develop a data processing service to extend the LOFAR community, essentially, to be able to offer this instrument data archive more widely to researchers so that they could generate from the the instrument data archive, so that they could generate science-ready data products from it and be able to both do the analysis and the storage of the data. So in this case, we had 3 suppliers, CSC, INFN, and SURF. And for each of the use cases separately, we conducted these broadly in the form of a session dedicated to discussion of technical aspects, a session dedicated to commercial aspects, and then a sort of a taking stock session where we just looked at what we'd talked about and stood back a little bit and looked at it, and then an overall sort of finishing up and analysing the findings and discussing what improvements perhaps could be brought to the situation. So the findings from those use cases we'll summarise in a few moments, but first of all, I'm going to hand over now to Sergio, who will take you through the platform design work that we conducted.
Thank you, Dale. So the platform design is the second phase of our analysis work. And what it did, basically, it was to combine 2 different types of analysis before going to derive our insights and recommendations. The previous one was about running a simulation of how a negotiation can happen in the context of the EOSC, what could be the role of the EOSC. So starting from practical real-world scenarios. Here was more top-down, applying a top-down methodology called Platform Design Toolkit to analyze the EOSC ecosystem and understand what could be the role of the EOSC as a mediator, as a platform that facilitates interactions between different types of organizations like the users, the suppliers, and the funders, and so on. In the business model area, if you've been involved into this activity in the past, you might be familiar with the business model canvas, which usually is very popular. It's, let's say, one page with 9 elements that are typically the key elements you need to design to understand and define a business model. That business model canvas works in the case when you have say a provider of services or products, and then a certain customer base. When you move into mapping ecosystem, you need more complex methodologies because there are many interfaces, so there are many business models running in each type of interactions. So the Platform Design Toolkit tried to solve this problem. It's an open source methodology, and provides a number of canvases inspired also by existing canvases that can be applied, and also provides a methodology, set of questions, and a workflow through which you can go through. So this is more it helps to define what is sometimes referred as a platform business model, and where you have an ecosystem organization that want to interact, and then you have a platform enabling these interactions. So typical use cases that are very famous nowadays are like the Apple when they publish their own Apple Store, who would allow developers to develop their own apps and then to reach a large base of user with their own device and having their own software that can be that was provided by Apple as a platform. Other examples are Uber and Airbnb, that they basically build this mediating platform. And our idea was to see the EOSC, or sometimes if you use the terminology of the Sustainability Working Group at the EOSC Federating Core, could be seen as a platform that enables the interaction between different organizations in the EOSC. Moving more into, I want just to provide some examples about what does it mean to apply this methodology in practice. That's mainly just some samples to give you an idea. So one of the first steps when you apply platform design thinking is to understand what are the key roles into the ecosystem. And the role, when we mean a role, it means we refer to a type of actor who can provide certain functionalities, who are interested has certain goals. And you need to consider that one organization can play also multiple roles into the ecosystem. And the platform design proposals also 4 main categories of roles, like there is the platform shapers, who are those who own the strategy of the platform in a way. Then there are the partners who participate into the ecosystem and in a more business-to-business interaction with the platform. Then you have the peer producers, those that come as a supplier in a supplier mode, that engage with the ecosystem to supply some service, content, or products. And then you have the peer consumers. So we did this exercise, we identified some roles, also some of the key interactions that we wanted to model. Once you identify the role, another important activity is for each role to understand what is their goal, what are the gains they expect, and especially what could be facilitated by what could be the gain they expect by approaching the platform, for instance. What is that push them to improve, to make sure they still stay relevant, and also what's the asset that they bring into the platform. Another type of canvas is about then for each of the relationships that have been identified to analyze, okay, for each couple of roles that they interact to map, describe the transactions, what is the channel, what do they exchange, what is the value they get back, and how the platform can improve those transactions. And then there's the learning engine canvas, who instead wants to investigate how roles can evolve into the platform. Is there any new, for instance, function they can play, and how to capture basically way to innovate the way an ecosystem is organized. And finally, one of the most important canvases is to draw the experience that each role would go through the platform, and also understanding what are the key elements of the business model. So there are more canvases that are part of the methodology. What we did in the exercise, we were supported by the platform design toolkit facilitators, and we ran 2 iterations. So the more iterations you run, the more you can develop finer analysis of the ecosystem. I will now quickly, given these 2 types of experiences, on one side we had the simulated negotiations that was mentioned by Dale, then the other one was the platform design. I will here recap on some key findings that we identified from this exercise. And in the document, you find more detailed descriptions. So the first one is that if you think about how it is the EOSC portal today, it's mainly a curated set of services that have been onboarded through a process to ensure quality of the information. And also it supports the possibility to order services. So it supports more you have the list, you have a catalog, and then you can also act on those catalog services to order them. That's sometimes in the categories of marketplaces. Sometimes it's referred as the marketplace experience. So when you go to the supermarket, you can already have pre-made products you can choose from. In this business-to-business simulated negotiation we did with Elixir and Astron, we saw that they need a different type of experience because they come with a complex problem where they need to be in interaction with the different suppliers to understand how they can customize, organize the infrastructure to meet their needs. So it's not a standard request that you can just pick up a ready-made solution for your needs. So in this way, okay, we identified the possible evolution of the EOSC portal to also to support say more professional services like marketplaces where you can come with your problem and then some supplier can come to you and say, okay, let's investigate, analyze how can I solve your problem with my own services or maybe with the services from somebody else. The second findings was about that also research organizations, when they approach, they need to have a long-term challenge. They want to find the long-term partnerships and who can advise them on the best solutions or services, and then who can mediate also on the best choices to make. So the long-term partnerships is very essential because they maybe have an activity span of years or even longer. And then technology providers can change, but still they would like to keep the same interface. That's another important aspect. The third one was that one of the key goals of the EOSC is to open up infrastructures, resources, data sets. So sometimes you find that organizations, they have their own data sets already organized. Maybe they have an infrastructure to serve the internal community. But if you want to push them to serve an additional community, they lack the resources. So having resources to support opening up the exploitation of their own asset is important. And then it should be provided to in the context of the EOSC to succeed. Some other key findings are that as many of the, when we talk about public research, usually there are public funded organizations who are on the demand side. And if they want to, if they get a budget to say buy services, they are subject to EC procurement directive. So normally they should run a tender and to allow competition from the market. And then different suppliers, they would compete to obtain the contract. And on the other side, when you go in the public to public service provision, because okay, in Europe we have many research organizations, but also we have many national infrastructures who are being developed for the last decades. So they are a relevant asset for the EOSC. On the other side, so the public to public collaboration to for service provision would need normally, let's say, use some exemption to the procurement directive to operate at the national level. For instance, often it is used the in-house status. When an organization is part of the governance of another, then they can do service provision internally without running a tender. And then what we observed that as soon as you start crossing borders, the public funded organizations that were part of the simulated negotiation, they, on one side, they will lose this type of exemption. So they have one barrier. The other one that if the publicly funded organization will run a tender, they will not reply because they, for kind of national mandate, because of this their purpose to serve, first of all, like a national community. On the other side is a public authority that will not compete on the market unless there are particular conditions, or maybe they provide some unique services that is scarce. So these are two important barriers that we identified. And then if you want to create a European open source cloud that allows both commercial providers and public funded providers to participate in a harmonious way, they need different solutions, not to cut the opportunity to one side or the other. So that's one of the key aspects, which is very important to be addressed. And also another aspect was the cost reimbursements. As soon as you start crossing borders, you have the complexity of a different VAT, different taxation implications, and many public funded institutions are not ready for this kind of challenges. And final, that we found also from the two use cases we had, there are also different funding situations that need to be considered in the design of the EOSC. For instance, Elixir had their own budget to buy services. They just wanted to understand what's the best solution for them. Astron, they had the needs, but also they needed a budget. So a function of, for instance, some kind of signposting functionality or helping to understand what could be the matching the providers, but also with the funding stream would be very useful as a function to be provided by the EOSC. So this was a main recap on the key findings that we want to highlight. Now we are moving to the insights and key recommendations, and I will give the words back to Dale for the first recommendation.
Okay, thanks very much, Sergio. So, so Sergio has summarized the main findings that we derived from the work. What did we learn from the work? And based on that, we synthesized insights and 3 key recommendations into 3 main sets, basically, and that's what we want to summarize in the next few slides and take you through. So firstly, concerning the matchmaking capability of the EOSC. So this is the EOSC as a platform, essentially, which can help to bring user demand and supply in contact with one another in what we talk about as transactions. So the overall insight here is that capabilities are required of the EOSC as a platform to support negotiation and matchmaking for complex and demanding use cases. So the EOSC could provide things like, if I switch the pointer on, if I go around these points, so starting at the top here, it could help to provide standardized and optimized processes, regulations, and agreements for transactions which match supply and demand. That would be something very helpful for it to go further than it currently does. Secondly, if the EOSC were to provide services listings in more numerous, standardized and granular categories, for example, permitting distinction between different forms of value-added support, such as just bare commodity services, added value services such as consultancy or collaboration, or commodity plus support, for example. So all these different categories of value add, it's quite difficult to distinguish them from one another, and it would be helpful to be able to more easily do so. Thirdly, demand side advertising of needs and challenges by the EOSC would be helpful. So to look at the examples of these two use cases, if those user groups were able to somewhere advertise using the EOSC what their use case was and say, look, you know, we're interested in doing this, we have a need for services, can anybody help? That could be quite a useful thing to provide as a function. The EOSC could also provide support for the use of supplier reputation. So this is something a little bit perhaps like TripAdvisor, which you may be familiar with as a web service, where the users basically rate the suppliers according to how well they felt they did their job. And of course, gradually over time, you build up the reputation of the supplier or not, as the case may be. And that would actually help to drive the quality of the services and resources available through the EOSC. And finally, as an example, it would also be quite helpful, we felt, if the EOSC could provide a knowledge base to signpost information about national funding sources. So really to help those who are seeking funding solutions to find their way through the maze of very complex and really, you know, large quantities of information about funding. So those are some suggestions that we make for ways in which the EOSC functionality could, as an information provider, could potentially be developed further compared to how it stands today. And overall, the key here is that rapid transactions are key to the success of the EOSC. And so all of these things may just help to kind of oil the wheels somewhat more. So relating to that, then the overall recommendation we drew was this. The EOSC has the opportunity to make matchmaking a standard process with a high rate of success. It should provide the capability to put demand and supply in contact efficiently and consistently, including for complex use cases, and to facilitate negotiation by acting as a platform to signpost information, to standardize and support dialogue, and to optimize transactions. So that's the overall recommendation that we drew. Okay. I'll hand over to Sergio for this second set of information.
Yes, thank you. The second recommendation is in the area of roles. Before, when I explained the platform design toolkit, I mentioned that one of the key steps is to identify the roles in the ecosystem. And then we, through our work, we identified that we see that the primary user of the EOS portal would be, we see not being the end researcher or the end research organizations. As a demand side, we see mainly what we call research support provider, who is basically an organization, or it can be staff, people within. It can go from scale, from the little support staff at the university to the large national infrastructure support research. That basically become the experts of the service catalog, of the technology, of the opportunities that can be organized by using digital services for research. And they are the mediator between the demand side and the end users who come with a problem, but they may miss the knowledge of the landscape, or the technology landscape, and so on. And then the mediator between the supplier. And they say the portal, the platform as a EOSC can also facilitate this role to develop and to create a network of research support providers at the European level that are supported by the EOSC platform in understanding basically how to, on the knowledge of the catalog, on the way contracts can be organized, and so on. And the kind of functionalities they could provide to, for instance, a research organization could be, for instance, they could help them to build the demonstrators and assess technology. They could help to understand also what are the risks and opportunities in making certain choices for suppliers. between different suppliers. And also they can explain, they make sure that they make the right choice to avoid lock-in, or at least that they are aware of what could be the lock-in or the constraints of certain decisions. So we see this kind of role that is needed into the EOS because it is already existing normally outside, before the EOS, let's say, even though it was not in an organized way at the European level. And so the recommendation here would be to create a coordination point at the EOSC level. And that would provide basically a way for the different research support provider organizations or to be engaged into the EOSC, to understand the opportunities, first of all, to step up into the EOSC and play this role, to understand what opportunities, what they can do, and also to get familiar with the catalog and with the internal processes on how services can be requested and so on, so that they can support research organizations. And this kind of role is already done at national level by national infrastructure. So we see national infrastructure as one of the primary type of organizations who could play this role into the EOSC. And this anyway should be open also to other type of organizations. And that's the main point for the second recommendation that came from one of the findings. Then I will hand back to Dale for the last recommendation.
Okay, thanks, Sergio. Yeah, so the final set of insights and the final recommendation were under the heading of shared resources. The overall insight here is summarized in the center. Shared resources such as storage and compute are a fundamental part of the value add of the EOSC. A means needs to be found to fund their cross-border use in support of international research collaboration. So basically what we felt was that the work that we conducted actually confirmed this view, which was a view that had already been proposed in the earlier federating core proposals that were published. And the work did help to stand that up actually. So measures which could help though, starting at the top here. Firstly, some studies to get further evidence of the benefits of cross-border research funding would be helpful. So just to look more at this area, it's very complex and I think we've begun, but there's so much more that you could look at. Secondly, to organise pilot cross-border research collaborations would be helpful to help to assess the potential value of data and other resources for new use cases. So helping to identify cross-border use cases that would benefit from use of the shared resources. I think that would be useful as well to just have further evidence of the need for them. Thirdly, relating to procurement. So the EOS could help by developing guidelines structures that facilitate P2P service collaboration. So further exploration of what would be necessary to be able to successfully apply the P2P exemption from public procurement rules. It's got good potential. I think the procurement deliverable research concluded that, but I think there needs to be more work done to develop I suppose maybe a body of knowledge that helps to provide examples of how the exemption could be successfully applied, because obviously our organizations are very cautious about dealing with procurement because they simply don't want to fall on the wrong side of the rules. Fourthly, we're here on the left, supplementary demand side funding for the use of national infrastructures, including or perhaps particularly in cross-border scenarios, would be very helpful as a complement to or a top-up for the existing current national supply side funding. So that was the specific funding recommendation or suggestion that we've put forward for how do you address the fact that it is just simply difficult and complicated to provide publicly funded national e-infrastructure services in a cross-border scenario. And this is one way that could perhaps help to sort of bridge the gap that currently exists in being able to do that. And then finally, the other observation that we made here was that association fees, EOSC association fees, or member state contributions to the partnership, if they were made partly in the form of in-kind donation of resources by member states, then that would actually, we felt, help to create a tighter coupling between the national infrastructures and the EOSC. So those are the overall insights relating to the shared resources and to their funding. The recommendation overall then that we drew from that is here. So the EOSC legal entity needs to ensure appropriate coordination and synchronization of different funding streams to sustain the whole EOSC ecosystem, including the shared resources. So by funding streams, it means national funding streams, EC money, money from RPOs and projects to pay for consumption of services, for example. So just looking at everything together. And to underpin this, it would be really helpful, we felt, for member states to have dialogues between ministries, research funders, and research service providers to form a more cohesive input and contribution across the operational support of pan-European research, representation in the EOSC Association, and also broader European research, EU research policy. So just trying to have a more holistic view, a more coordinated view, and to try to sort of bridge some of the gaps and the lack of synchronization that we felt currently existed. And we felt that was what was illustrated by the use cases. So finally, briefly, some concluding remarks. The EOSC has the opportunity to reduce barriers and enable frictionless, easy access to data and related services across geographic boundaries and disciplines so that research communities can better connect with suppliers, users, and funders. We've adopted simulated negotiations and platform thinking in the work that we've done over the previous few months as approaches to better explore how to better design the EOSC ecosystem and the related platform. And as a result of the work, what we've shown you is that we've identified 3 key recommendations concerning establishing the EOSC to provide a rich matchmaking capability, to recognising and supporting the very important role of research support providers, and also to the EOSC accepting the cost of sustaining the shared resources. And those are the recommendations that we would like to gather feedback on via the public consultation that's now open. Very briefly, the future work that's going to be taking place. So the consultation is open until the 9th of October. The Iron Lady document from the Sustainability Working Group is due to be published shortly. And the SRIA is due to also be launched next month. And then rolling forward to the end of the EOSC-hub project, there will be 2 final deliverables that are relevant to this work. One is the final procurement deliverable that will evaluate the findings of the work done so far and put forward some recommendations. And the other one is the final, what's called the EOSC-hub governance and sustainability implementation roadmap, which is the context within which the Federated Core proposals and now the cross-border work have been conducted, and that relate to the governance and sustainability of EGI and EU DAT. We've put some references on the final slide that you should find are clickable in the set of slides that will be made available tomorrow. And then we'd like to move to the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dale and Sergio. Now I suppose we can head into the Q&A section of this webinar. I invite the attendees to please raise their hands if they have any particular questions to our panelists. Okay, we have a question from Volker Beckman. Volker, please introduce yourself and your organization, and then you may state your question.
Yes, hello, it's Volker Beckman. I'm working for the French Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation. My question is, you seem to have the understanding that the EOSC Association is a funding channel. And I think, my understanding is that the EOSC Association is not there to channel funding. So we cannot raise large fees through the association, and then the association is running services financed through these fees. Can you comment on that?
Well, I can comment briefly. The others may have comments to add as well, or indeed, actually, there might be some people in the audience who also want to comment on that. I don't feel that I'm terribly close to the discussions about the EOSC Association that have been going on in the recent months. So I'm not personally terribly clear, actually, about exactly how that form of funding will work. And so I was trying to be quite careful, in fact, in what I was saying over the last few minutes about that aspect, because to me it's not yet clear exactly what will come, what will be provided, if you like, in the form of EOSC Association fees, what will be provided in the form of EC funding. So the details of, you know, which bit of those pays for the core, which bit might pay for anything else, is I have not seen anything, and I'm not terribly clear on exactly what is proposed to happen there just now. Other people may be better informed than me, though, certainly. So there might be others who would comment more in a more informed way.
The Commission was very clear on the fact that the funding is not going to go through the association. So whatever comes out of the work program, Horizon Europe, is not going to go through the association. And then we have to see the participation of the member states rather goes through in-kind contribution. There's not a cash flow, as far as I understand, towards the association.
Yeah, I can also add a comment. I think the question probably was triggered by the recommendation number 2, where there was a suggestion that a possible way to fund this EOS coordination team could be through the association fees. Was part of the core. Maybe what we need to do just to remove the possible solution, maybe we just have the recommendation framed about what is the need, and then okay, the funding source will be, if it is accepted by the governance, the appropriate funding source will be identified in the implementation of the funding streams. Yeah.
Thank you, Sergio. Okay, are there any other questions from the audience, or perhaps someone would like to comment there? We're in the last few minutes of our webinar. I see we have Yanis. Yanis, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and your organization.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ioannis Rakosmidis from Insights Consulting. And I would like to ask if you have foreseen the possibility private companies to develop services for EOS in a commercial manner, I mean.
So I think the answer is yes, actually, on this. So the focus of our work was mostly on publicly funded service providers, as we explained. But in the platform design work that we conducted, as Sergio explained, the platform design approach was about looking at opportunities that exist within the ecosystem. And I think what could be seen was that there were potentially opportunities within the ecosystem for commercial providers. So I don't mean specifically commercial cloud service providers. Actually, what I'm thinking about is more in the area of the research support providers, for example, that in theory, that's an area that there is room possibly for commercial providers to offer activity. But similarly, there are no doubt numerous other areas within the EOSC. If you look at it from a platform perspective, there were plenty of different things. If you look at if you think about entities participating in an ecosystem, striving to get better at what they do, striving to kind of rise up through the value chain, if you like, and find opportunities to do so. I think there were numerous gaps, if you like, that we saw where it would be possible for an organization to identify a niche, to move into it, to develop a business, to grow its business, and to move on up the value chain. That was the sort of thing that we were seeing. Some of those things that we saw, I think you could see would lend themselves relatively well to players from the commercial sector.
Yeah, on top of this, I can add that, yes, as mentioned by Dale, okay, at the moment, okay, this specific piece of work addressed the public-to-public collaboration. There were other pieces of work done in the project that analyze also public-to-private. And if you look, also I can mention 2 other initiatives that are relevant, that you may be interested in. One is about the Ochre project, who launched a tender to, let's say, pre-select cloud providers who are willing to support research, for which there will be dedicated funding. This is more, let's say, from cloud providers like the other infrastructure as a service platform or software as a service. That is one initiative. Another, and to engage between public and private into the EOSC. Another one is the existence of the EOSC Digital Innovation Hub, which is been bootstrapped by the EOSC Hub project. There will be later a dedicated webinar. That is merely a mechanism for private organizations to engage with public funded providers or say research organizations and to innovate by collaborating with them. And that would be one primary channel also for private organizations to engage. And then more opportunities as funding that will be defined can emerge. And we need to consider anyway the EOSC portal will be, the more it will evolve, we hope it will be also a platform where different roles, different organizations can engage and find opportunities to create value.
Thank you, Sergio. Are there any other questions? Perhaps we only have time for one more. If there are any questions from the attendees. Okay, I don't see any more questions. But anyways, I suppose with that we can close the webinar. Just a reminder that the slides and the recordings will be made available in the website maximum by tomorrow. We'll aim to have it by today as well, but maximum by tomorrow you'll have it on the webinar page of EOSC-hub. I posted in the chat some relevant links, especially for the consultation. So please have a look at that. From our panelists, do you have any last words before we close today's session?
Yes, if I could just say, firstly, thank you to everybody for attending and for your interest. I think we've presented you with an enormous amount of information actually today, and I know it's difficult to digest it all in a short space of time. I'd really like to encourage you to go and read the briefing paper if you haven't already, and to take part in the consultation. I think it would be very helpful to get insights and feedback and opinions from you about what we've proposed. Thank you.
Yeah, we would like also to thank you for your participation. I'm looking forward to your comments. If you have any questions, also if you want, you can reach out us using the email addresses you see in the slide. And also would like to mention that as part of the work package 12 activity, we plan to do another chunk of work that was mentioned by Dale in the future work, which is about more organizing the different business models that are relevant for the EOS, not only public to public, but also public to private. We expect to have more new outputs in 1 or 2 months' time to show you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.